Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the NEST panel. So I'm going to get started with the introduction of my fellow panelists here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rachael Fleurence. I'm the Executive Director of NEST. And I will now introduce my fellow panelists to you. I'll start with Jeff Shuren, who most of you at this point know well. Dr. Shuren has been the director of the Center for Devices and Radiological Health since 2010. Dr. Shuren is a neurologist and a lawyer by training, and he's also held leadership positions at CMS. Dr. Shuren was instrumental in the creation of MDIC a few years ago, and certainly has been instrumental both in creating NEST and in supporting NEST as we've taken off. So welcome, Dr. Shuren. Dr. Cathy Blake is a physician by training. She is the Vice President of Healthcare Quality at the American Medical Association. Dr. Blake serves as a governing committee member of the NEST governing committee. She also previously served as the executive director of the Physician Consortium for Performance Improvement, or PCPI. So Dr. Blake has also been on the planning boards for NEST and comes with a lot of experience with public-private partnerships. So welcome, Dr. Blake. Dr. McMurry-Heath is an MD, PhD. She is currently the Worldwide Vice President of Regulatory and Clinical Affairs at Johnson & Johnson. Dr. McMurry-Heath served at the FDA, where she was also instrumental in the creation of MDIC. And she now serves as the Interim Governing Committee Chair of the NEST Governing Committee. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us on the panel this morning. So before I start asking some questions to our panelists, what we thought in preparing this session would be very helpful to all of you is to give you a status update, a more formal status update on NEST since last year. So I was here last year giving you the early look into NEST, into the vision, into what we hope to be able to achieve with NEST. But a year in, we've made some real progress, which I want to sort of share with you today before we go into the questions with the panel. So a quick overview of NEST. So if I were only to show you one slide for NEST, this would be the slide. It describes our mission that we developed with the governing committee members. It's to accelerate the development and translation of new and safe health technologies, leveraging real-world evidence and innovative research. From a historical perspective, NEST is not a new concept, but there's been a lot of sort of thinking and groups that have come together to think about what NEST should be. It's been conceived and thought of as a voluntary data network of collaborations, and I'll talk to you how we've been implementing that vision. If you fast forward to 2016, the FDA provided a grant to the MDIC to start incubating and forming the NEST Coordinating Center. In 2017, I joined MDIC as the executive director of NEST, and a couple of months later, we selected and announced the multi-stakeholder governing committee on which Jeff, Cathy, and Michelle serve. Last year, we developed our 5-year strategic and operational plan. We formed the initial data network to support the NEST work, and we've also announced 2 expert committees on data quality and methods, which I'll say a little bit more about in a minute. So that's essentially our timeline in the last, I'd say, 18 months and sort of what we've been doing. A few words about governance. We talked this morning about the importance of public-private partnerships and of multi-stakeholder governance. Well, this is the NEST Governing Committee. It includes 15 people coming from all aspects of the device ecosystem. So we have patients, clinicians, we have payers, we have regulatory, we have health systems, and we have the trade association representatives from industry that also represent the industry interests. So this is a 15 member multi-stakeholder panel that allows us to really understand the different perspectives and pull them together in order to shape the NEST strategy and operations. So a few words about the data network, which is really sort of the heart of NEST. And that's really been at the center of the 2018 activities, is bringing together a number of collaborators. Dr. Gottlieb mentioned them this morning. There are 12 of them, and I'm happy to say that we're about to include Flatiron. Some of you may be familiar with the work that they're doing in oncology with real-world evidence, and they've agreed to be a partner with NEST, so we'll be soon be able to announce them and include them in our list of partners. And in addition to bringing together these groups, we've started to implement actual test cases, and I'm going to talk to you more about these. But these were real questions that industry had that they wanted to test using real-world evidence, and we're about to launch 8 of these with these network collaborators. In parallel, we continue to develop our operational processes, our master services agreements, our data sharing agreements, so all the operational pieces that need to be in place in order to support a coordinating center such as NEST. So these are our 2018 activities. Here are a list of our collaborators. So there are the 12 health systems. They include largely health providers, but we also have health payers represented. And under MDIC, a number of registries are available to work with NEST as well. As was mentioned this morning in Dr. Gottlieb's keynote, these networks cover actually about 195 hospitals and close to 4,000 outpatient clinics. So there's a lot of groups and data available to do this work with us. This slide is simply another kind of way to look at the data network that NEST is building. So the 12 initial partners, the number of hospitals and clinics, close to 500 million patient records. So that gives you a sense of the scale of the work that we can do. Most of these groups have a number of common data models under which they organize their data. They have a number of refreshes for their data that happen periodically in order to support real-world evidence kind of work. 2 quick words on our subcommittees. We've just launched our data quality subcommittee and our methods subcommittee. These are groups of experts coming from industry, academia, and from the FDA that are going to help us shape our data quality framework and our methods work. So the methods committee, for example, will review the protocols for the test cases. The data quality subcommittee will help us ensure that the health systems working with us are adhering to high standards of data quality. This is simply a list of our subcommittee members, and they're on the website if you're interested in learning more. But again, these are multi-stakeholder groups, and they really bring together experts from both from the registry world and from the distributed data network world. So really bringing together the best people right now that have been working on these issues for a number of years now. The really exciting news for NEST are our test cases that we're about to launch. We solicited these questions from industry last fall, and these questions are really to be able to test the capabilities of the data network as well as to build out the operations for NEST. Here is the list. It will also be available on our website if you're interested. Interestingly, we had a really wide range of questions spanning a number of disease areas. So you'll see there on the right-hand side, cardiology, vascular, surgery, orthopedics, dermatology. So a real nice array of disease areas to be able to test the network capabilities. We have different kind of levels of risk for the devices. So we both have PMA and 510K devices. And the intended use of this data is quite diverse. So it goes from preparing a pre-market submission to label expansions to post-market surveillance. So a lot of different possible uses of this data for the companies that submitted these questions. Each of these topics now has a number of network collaborators working to execute the studies. And so here you see on the list, each test case has between 2 and 4 health systems working with the industry partner to execute the study. And then my final slide is just a reminder that NEST is funded through user fee monies, and sort of came out of it the MDUFA agreement. There's a number of milestones that NEST needs to meet according to this letter, and here we show you the progress that we've made in meeting these milestones. We are on task to establish a framework to fund pilot projects for devices not currently subject to a registry, which is what we're doing using the EHR data directly, to support expanded indications for use and new clearance approvals. All of these are on our list of current test cases. And again, implement pilots for at least 2 product codes, 510K and PMA, which we're also doing. Now we are in very early stages of this work, so we're not going to claim victory just yet. But certainly we're well on our way to meeting the MDUFA requirements that were established for us. So that ends my formal update. We thought it was important to sort of give you the context, especially sort of given the progress that's been made since last year and the much more specific work that NEST has been doing before I turn it over to our panelists. So some of the questions that I have for them are really around, so all of you serve on the NEST Governing Committee. So part of what I'd like you to share with the audience today is really sort of the progress and the success that you've seen in the last year to 18 months since we all started together trying to really implement this vision for NEST. So maybe, Michelle, do you want to start?
So first of all, it's tremendous. If I had one word to summarize it, this has been an area that has stymied the device industry for years. And it's incredible to think that within the last 18 months, we have up and constructed a data network that may really be able to test device questions in a very reasonable way. So it's really around bridging, building, and now testing. Bridging in that we really had to bridge all of the previous efforts to what we were working on. So as you know, many great minds have been working on this area for quite some time, ways to use real-world evidence to do device studies. And Rachael Fleurence has done, and her team have done an amazing job of linking to those past efforts and capturing the knowledge that they generated, and then building the network out so that we actually have a huge network, as you saw, healthcare providers that are willing to test medical devices in many different settings. That was an incredible achievement. And now we have the opportunity to streamline how our companies go to these healthcare providers and ask our clinical and real-world evidence questions. And then finally, testing, and that's probably the most important thing. It's really an experiment at this point, making sure that we can test, that we can actually perform studies within this network, and we can do them more rapidly and in a more streamlined manner than we would otherwise on our own. So that is really the promise of NEST, to be a one-stop shop for those of us who want to do real-world evidence studies in a way that brings down the cost, speeds up the process, eliminates some of the bureaucratic red tape, and facilitates our innovations and our conclusions for patients.
So as the recovering clinician at the table, and also really on behalf of physicians, and I would have to say the patient representatives and consumer representatives on the NEST Governing Committee, I hope you've gotten a good sense of the really rapid pace of getting NEST up and running. And I have to give a lot of credit to that rapid pace, obviously to Rachael Fleurence and her entire team, who hit the ground running and have really not stopped, to Jeff Shuren, who has believed in NEST for a long time, to Tamara Syrick-Jensen with CMS, who is able to give us that perspective, and also to MDIC, of which all of you are gathered here for its annual meeting and for its 5-year anniversary today. I've set up a foundation in the past, and anybody who's done that knows that it's hard, and that getting everything in place, like a governing body and all of the administrative and operational challenges addressed, can be challenging. So I think it was brilliant that the decision was made to have the governing committee award and the NEST award come to MDIC, because MDIC was several years ahead in terms of being an operating entity. And so what you see today in terms of the pilot projects and demonstration projects and the work that's being done is a reflection of not having to set up all of the administrative award structure that otherwise I think would have slowed us down by a good 18 months to possibly 2 years. What do clinicians want, and what do I think that we'll see coming out of NEST? It comes from the nature of the studies being done. So one study in particular looks at a device that is being used in a way by physicians that appears to benefit patients, but for which we do not have evidence to establish the safety and effectiveness. So clinicians want to know, is what we're doing, and of course we think it's the right thing, actually proving out in the real world setting in which we practice. So I think it's that kind of study that we are particularly interested in. The second is this notion of label expansion. So if something is already available and is approved, and you're able to expand the label, extend it to other areas, some of that research and development time has been cut to a very short time, and therefore less delay. So I think the idea of getting devices either new or expanded labeling is extremely helpful. And then the last point that I would make is that we're realizing that we're not just establishing NEST to do post-market surveillance. So I really see this as the fulfillment of the implementation of the vision expressed years ago through FDA and through the Center for Devices about the total product life cycle of devices, that it can start from pre-market all the way to post-market surveillance. And so I can certainly say I'm incredibly excited to be able to participate in this.
Well, I think the achievements, for NEST in the past 18 months have been truly remarkable. And kudos to Rachael, your team, all the folks in MDIC and MDIC partners who have been involved in the effort so far. It's been one of the most fast-paced efforts we've ever participated in. I think to highlight over the past 18 months some notable accomplishments, one of them is the NEST Coordinating Center Governing Committee, which has representation from all the key stakeholder communities in the device ecosystem that may be interested and impacted from NEST, bring them to the table to sort of drive this. I've been so impressed with how quickly and now that group has gelled as a very collaborative, high-functioning entity. And the second is that we have a very good plan that is already being implemented to assure we have really the necessary data infrastructure in place to launch NEST version 1.0 by the end of calendar year 2019-ish, which is a daunting task. I'm glad it's Rachael who's got to truly drive the trains, but I think we're well on our way to making good on that commitment.
Thank you. So, Jeff, what does success look like from your perspective, from the FDA perspective, for NEST?
Well, sort of, I guess, entry-level success would be that NEST is being used broadly across the device industry and by other stakeholders, and it is helping to achieve the CDRH vision of U.S. patients having first access. If I took it to the next level for success, I'll be satisfied with entry level. But if you really see where we can go, we're talking about transforming clinical practice and clinical research through a very different mechanism of more timely, informative, really continuous, and more robust evidence generation to inform not only device technology, but clinical practice.
Thank you. And Michelle, I'll ask you, from your position, both as sort of the governing committee chair of NEST and your position in industry, what would you say to your industry colleagues today about sort of what's in it for them to work with NEST? Why should they be interested in NEST? What would you say to them today about that?
There's so many reasons. I think the primary reason is that all of our companies are faced not just with a very large amount of investment in generating clinical evidence, but a growing amount of investment. We're facing into higher and higher demands for information about how our devices perform in patients in the real world. And if we each try to address all of these demands and meet them one by one, it could crush our industry. It's growing at that rate. NEST has the promise to really simplify the process, to make it a pathway, a conduit to identifying the right clinical settings, to ask the right questions, to ask them simply, quickly, and to get reliable and comparable results so that you can know and have confidence that your device is performing just as you expect it to. That's primary in terms of what's important for our entire industry to be able to really expand to realizing the visions that so many of the entrepreneurs in this room have. I think the second thing that is important for us to know is that NEST is working very deliberately to become sustaining. I know I'm going to make Rachael nervous when I say this, but the business model of NEST has been as important to us on the governing committee as the practical scientific model. So how can we deliver a service as NEST that is worth your time and your investment and your revenue to help you accomplish your goals? This should be an organization that you can go to that will help you smooth the path and bring down your cost, and you will choose the NEST avenue because it's cheaper and more efficient, but at the same time, give it enough business so that it can self-sustain over time. And I think that's very important. I think some of the previous efforts to build health information networks that can be used for medical product testing have taken the fully nonprofit approach, which is fantastic, and it allows them to have a lot of objectivity getting off the ground. But when you're talking about sustaining the effort, we have to come up with a business model that works as well. And we've invested a lot of time in that, and there's a lot more to come on that as well.
Cathy, you've been involved in a number of public-private partnerships and initiatives over the years, and you were also heavily involved in the planning of NEST with the Brookings Institute. What have been some things that have surprised you as we've actually implemented the vision of NEST? What's been a surprise to you, and what's been different from what you think that was going on during the planning phase?
So NEST is really where the rubber meets the road. That I think it was very helpful to go through the planning process. In fact, it was indispensable because just as important as what you decide you're going to do are the things that you decide that you're not going to do. And secondly, once you've decided what you're going to do, to then have a clear plan laid out of how you will stage things. And so the planning board did anticipate the staging of projects over the course of the first, I believe it was 5 years that NEST would be in existence. So that has really come to fruition. As I said earlier, I think the speed at which NEST has gotten up and running and has real projects has certainly exceeded our expectations. The third is, and Jeff alluded to this, is the gelling of the governing board and the governing committee, I should say. And it's not, and you wouldn't want it to all be just kumbaya. And I think that what has been so valuable is the willingness of all of the people around the table to take this fledgling enterprise, get it off the ground, share their perspectives in good faith and work out what might be challenges or areas where their perspectives really differ. Now, what my hope is, and again, I go back to the clinician perspective, is what are the things that give intellectual stimulation and excitement to clinical practice? And it's the opportunity to take care of people in a way that you couldn't 6 months or a year ago, because the device, the therapy, the opportunity just did not exist. My passion for medical devices came from being, amongst other reasons, an intern the year that the first cardiac implanted defibrillators were placed in people. And I had the privilege of taking care of the first person in the world who received that defibrillator. So when you think about that opportunity in a clinical setting to be able to deliver novel therapies to patients, in her case, just barely in time, that makes all the difference. And I see NEST, my vision of success would be that it's part of a learning health system, that it engages clinicians so they see themselves as participants in generating that real-world evidence. Not all clinicians can participate in, nor perhaps do they want to participate in, randomized controlled trials. But they can all participate, given the essential ingredients, like a data network. They can all participate in the generation of real-world evidence. So my vision would be that clinicians across this country would look at medical devices and know that they are contributing to the knowledge about the function of those devices.
Thank you, Cathy. Jeff, we've been at NEST now for about 18 months, and so I and my team have been in conversations with industry about doing things differently. Some of the trepidations we hear on the industry side are, but the regular pathways, we know how to work them. We're a little nervous about going down a new road like NEST and real-world evidence. So what would you have to say to the industry folks who have more trepidation about treading new paths with NEST when they feel that it might be safer to go down what they know?
I would sort of adopt the motto for Lotto. You have to be in it to win it. So get on board. You're not going to see the value unless you're participating. Well, I'll take it back to the device industry. They're some of the most innovative people on the planet. Well, we all know innovation is based on taking risks. So take some risks. Do you want more? I can do a lot of platitudes all afternoon. I mean, yeah.
Now I've forgotten what I was going to say. I had a brilliant comment to follow, and now you've the platitude. So no, we won't do platitudes. Well, what I will say is NEST right now has a call for round 2 test cases that closes on September 19th. So there's still about 10 days. In the first round, we have 5 companies working on the 8 test cases. If any of you would like to be in the game, play the lotto, please do look at our opportunity to work with us. NEST is funding these test cases, so there are some funds available for this work. And it will involve you finding a question that you'd like to test using real-world evidence, and then come and work with the NEST team, come and work with our data network partners, come and be part of the fun of doing this early work. So the opportunity is open. Please do take a look at it. This afternoon, there's a breakout session on NEST where some of our colleagues from the health systems and from industry will be talking to you about what the test case has meant to them and what it's looked like. So there really is that opportunity to be a pioneer and to play the lotto. But the odds are better than with the lotto, I'd say, much better. So just sort of, I mean, thinking about Nest, where we're now a year in, we're sort of a solid year into this, and I'm just going to go back to the three of you and say, what do you think the biggest success is going to look like for us over the next 3 years, and then what's our biggest challenge? What could break Nest as we look to the future? So maybe Michelle, we'll start with you.
I think the thing that has stymied us quite a bit is figuring out how we draft agreements. This is very dry and very boring, but draft agreements in a way that's acceptable to multiple health partners and acceptable to multiple device companies. And so I think having a willingness to really try to streamline our concerns and our real issues into the most salient ones, so that we have a very fast pathway and a very fast track to setting up new cases and new studies with the health partners. I think it's going to be challenging. It's dry, but it's challenging. I think the biggest opportunity is really to see NEST as not just providing data within the US confines, but also globally. Most of our companies don't just operate in the US, but it would be wonderful if we had an easier pathway to generate data here in the US that could be used and accepted around the world. That could really transform the way all of our companies operate, and I think that's within our grasp.
So my vision of success would be that we have so many of you submitting proposals and ideas that we can barely keep up with the demand for data partners who are able to answer the questions that you have. And in fact, one of the early steps that is being taken with the applications is we actually do a pre-screening of, is the question as posed, is it feasible for the data partners to be able to answer it? So we have no interest in wasting your time or your resources if it's not feasible, if it's not something that can be answered. But I also think it's not a waste of your time if you ask those questions, because then, quite frankly, we then learn, and our data partners learn, what else we need to have in place to be able to get those questions answered going forward. So it's a very pragmatic approach to answering, whether it's a label extension or a pre-market approval type of question. The second, for me, success would look like that all physicians who are involved in implanting medical devices or using medical devices would have the NEST website bookmarked amongst their favorites on their computer, so that if they see something weird or they wonder about a particular observation and whether anybody else has seen it, that they would, maybe not in 2 years, but in 3 to 5 years, click there and be able to see if that question had been raised. So then that, to me, would say that NEST has infiltrated the clinical community in a way that I think could really help patients.
So I think 3 years from now, we will be looking at NEST. Certainly early version of NEST is up and running, and we have entities that are using NEST. That becomes normal course of business for them. A big opportunity for us is crowdsourcing data. I see as kind of the next big area for going, and I think it's great that NEST is now moving forward to kind of look at patient-generated data, and we're going to talk about some complementary efforts by FDA at the end of the day, little teaser alert. And then big challenge, fear. It's basically fear. People just too afraid to jump in to do it. But I'll tell you how things progress. Here's the evolution of ideas. Complementary, back in 2011, we issued our strategy on medical device innovation. We proposed a pathway for essentially breakthrough devices. We called it the innovation pathway. The reaction from industry was, this is god-awful, terrible. don't do it. Going to take resources away from other important things. Please stop. And we knew there would be issues with it, so we moved forward with a pilot. We did some pilots. People got kind of interested. Then we decided we were going to launch a program. We did it. Then the industry came back and said, let's put it in statute to assure that you never change your mind again. So 3 years from now, we'll probably have a legislative proposal to assure that NEST is instantiated forever. How's that?
I'm looking to see just how much time we have. We're good? Okay. So I will say, I think what's been really interesting in the last year and a half sort of trying to implement NEST was, first of all, would the health systems be interested in participating? I think that was a question mark. And what we found is quite a lot of interest and dedication to being part of this initial effort, rolling up their sleeves and sort of figuring out how to work with us, both from an operational perspective, but also from a scientific perspective. One of the things that I heard a lot when I started was, well, you can't do this kind of research without the UDI. Like, no one's implemented UDI in the EHR. You, therefore, are not going to be able to do any robust research directly with health systems. And so it was somewhat of a daunting task to sort of set off and have conversations with health systems about whether or not any of this work was going to be feasible or not. And I think the biggest lesson is only when you start testing on very specific questions that you really get a feel for what the challenges are and what the issues are but also what the solutions are. So until you actually try and answer questions with real investigators, real companies. These things tend to be generalities and possibly barriers to actually getting the work done. So for those of you who may be wondering how these test cases are possible without widespread implementation of UDI, we have found a number of creative solutions to identify brand-specific devices in the EHR data. Sometimes the manufacturer has a file with just enough information that can be linked to the health system data in order for that brand-specific device to be then identified and then for the rich clinical data to be available for the study. So sometimes there's actually some quite simple workarounds that are available in order for the test cases to launch. When we initially got that list of 9, I did not think that they would all be feasible. And it turns out that most of them, after these early exploratory stages, were actually quite doable with the health systems. So I think one of my lessons over the last 18 months has really been that having very specific questions to work through with health systems, with industry partners, with the FDA has really been critical in helping us move forward. And we've moved fast because I think the potential was greater than maybe even some of us who were optimistic thought. So here we are a year after sort of the early presentation of the vision of NEST to a place where we have some very tangible results to show. So I hope those of you in the room who are interested will come and talk to the NEST team about participating and being part of these early pioneers that are helping set up NEST. Because this also gives you opportunity to engage with us as we build out our processes and as we're a learning health system, sort of really build it so that it serves the ecosystem as it needs to. So with that, I think we can take a few questions from the audience. We have about 5 minutes left. If there are any burning questions, we can certainly take these. Yes?
This is really out there, but since Jeff started it, I feel free to say. Is there any opportunity? Oh, that's better. Can you hear me back there? Great. It's a way out there question, but since Jeff got that ball rolling, I thought maybe I could ask it. This certainly has the opportunity to change a lot. When it comes to doctors who aren't really involved in the research process, is there opportunity to get data from the health systems to them and to get them excited about their participation in the process? Can this be used to broaden folks who wouldn't ever go into the IRB process in a deeper way? Can the health system data be used in that sort of a way? I think this relates to something Cathy was saying.
Yeah, I would say a resounding yes to that. And there will be, I think, different, as we've seen with really all improvement and engagement efforts within health systems, there will be the people who are right at the leading edge who may want that interaction in terms of protocol design or be the investigator at a particular site, who start to become very savvy in terms of the exploration of medical device performance. But that gives you the toehold that you need, because you then have that individual who's then able to share that, whether it be with physicians in training or with colleagues who are already in full-fledged practice, and who then see themselves not as a principal investigator or study designer, but as somebody who's a contributor to something that is larger than themselves and is also more than the clinical approach, which is generally one patient at a time. And so I think then, knowing that all 50 of my defibrillator patients implanted in a period of time, all of them, their data contributes to continued learning, is critical. I think we'll have to make the case over time to those clinicians. I actually think that's part of why I was chosen to serve on the governing committee, because I'm passionate about it. I practiced in a clinical environment for 25 years. And this opportunity was like brain food, so that practice did not become mundane, routine. It really was so much more interesting. So I think that that appetite is there. It's maybe suppressed at times, but it's there.
Yep.
Hi there. Wes Sedorowski from Bebron. Is there a counterpart on the drug side of NEST, both in government and in industry? Because I'm thinking about the potential opportunities here, and inevitably the drug device combination will come up, or even to label expansion of devices which may creep into the drug world. So obviously it's important that we're in alignment with the drug side of the business, both in government and in industry. So can you expand on that? Have you ventured there?
So the drug program is involved in looking at opportunities for appropriately leveraging real-world evidence in drug-related decisions. We engage with the various medical product centers in FDA. We're all sharing information. I think, CDER, CBER are in a slightly different place just because of the nature of drugs, and there's certain reasons why we can and have already been making earlier use of real-world evidence on the device side. They also, from a system standpoint, they have Sentinel. We participate in Sentinel to some extent, but it's really more of a drug focused program. It is very different because it is an FDA system. It is started with payer claims, and we could not make as great use of it because we often couldn't identify the device that was in fact being used. We envision NEST, though, as something very different, not an FDA system of, by, and for the ecosystem. And that's why you have a governing committee that is made up of the key stakeholder groups, and we are merely a member of the community working together for our shared objectives. I think over time we're going to start to see more of these various efforts come closer and closer together, but we've got to be on a slightly different journey because of some of the differences in the nature of drugs and devices and the regulatory frameworks that were in place that Dr. Gottlieb alluded to this morning.
Jeff, can I just add something to that you wouldn't say, but I can say? Coming from a company that has both drugs and devices is a very important part of our business model. Usually when there's a pharmaceutical question asked, you add a 0, or you might add 2 zeros. And that makes it very difficult sometimes to answer the very device-focused questions that also need to be asked and are going to have just as large an impact on healthcare and public health down the road. So one of the benefits of FDA working with MDIC to establish NEST is that MDIC takes from their lens primarily the interest in advancing and growing the medical device industry and making sure that our way of working and our way of coming up with new innovations is supported, and NEST is built upon that foundation. So I think it's important for us to figure it out for our industry and then open the doors to others that may benefit.
Thank you. We're out of time, so I'm going to ask you to join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you.